Hey everyone, welcome to another session of N8N at Scale. I'm Angel Menendez, staff developer advocate here at N8N. Before joining N8N, I spent years in the cybersecurity world working with teams at Palo Alto Networks and Threat Connect. My focus has always been in helping teams automate safely and effectively, especially when things get complex. I'm joined today by our special guest, Elvis Saravia. Let me go ahead and pull him online here. Here we go. Welcome, Elvis.
Hello.
I'll let you say a
Hello.
couple words about yourself if you don't mind, to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm excited. I'm excited to be here, Angel. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very excited to talk about AI evaluation, especially for AI agents, and using this powerful tool called N8N, which we're all excited about to keep developing with. So very excited to be here.
Awesome. Elvis has worked on some incredible projects, including Galactica at Meta AI, and has helped lead initiatives at FAIR, PyTorch, and Papers with Code. If anyone knows how to design evaluations that actually work in production, it's him. And a quick shout out, we've also got two members of our N8N product team hanging out in the chat today, Julio and JP. They'll be answering questions live and flagging some for us to dive into during the Q&A. So don't be shy, drop your questions as we go. Now, today's session is all about one of the trickiest but most critical parts of building with AI, evaluations. How do you know that your system is actually working the way you think it is, especially when a tiny prompt tweak can fix one bug but quietly break 5 other things? We'll walk through how to evaluate agentic workflows, catch regressions early, and make better choices around prompts, models, and deployment. Whether you're testing outputs or monitoring them in production, evaluations give you a way to know, not guess. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover how to build evaluation data sets, how to define and choose meaningful metrics, and how to actually run those evaluations within N8N. Now, whether you're working on enterprise-grade AI or just starting to automate with large language models, this session is designed to help you move faster with more confidence. We've got a demo queued up. We'll be answering questions in real time. And our hope is to leave you with practical takeaways you can apply today. So with that, let's get into it. Elvis, again, welcome, sir. I'm excited for today's session. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our slideshows here so we have them available. I wanted to, first of all, highlight some of the resources that we have available. So we're going to be going over a demo that we've created, me and Elvis, to kind of show how to do evaluations in a meaningful way. We did, or actually I should say, Elvis created a data set and template that we want to provide to you. You can visit the bit.ly links here in the webinar slide. Feel free to download these, follow along as we're going along with it to make it a little bit easier. And Cedric, I see you're asking about whether the session will be recorded. Yes, it's definitely going to be recorded and available online afterwards. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and change the slide here. So again, our focus today is all about from prompt to production, essentially smarter AI with evaluation. So Elvis, let's dive right into it. Can you tell me a little bit about, and I'm going to go ahead and share your screen here. Give me just a moment while I do that.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and turn on your screen. Or do you mind sharing your screen if you're not? Oh, yeah, you are. There we go.
It's there.
Perfect. All right, excellent. I'm going to let you go ahead and take over.
All right. Thank you so much for that nice introduction, Angel. As I said, very excited to be here with this community. I've been, developing with N8N for the last few months, and very excited about all the new features, especially this AI evaluation features, because I think it's really powerful and it's a really important feature to help folks that are really seriously building, want to build real world applications with N8N. Evaluations is such a key component of that. So the first thing I want to start off with is, just motivate a little bit on why do we need evaluation, right? Why is this such a big deal, and why N8N introduced this feature and is putting emphasis on this? So what we need to understand first, right, before we build any N8N workflow with agentic AI systems or whatever, we need to understand the base technology. The technology here is language models, right? Large language models. These large language models, by nature are non-deterministic. You might have heard that word before. So what does non-deterministic actually means is that for, let's say, a prompt that you're using in your application, it is not guaranteed that you will get the same output. And this non-determinism actually leads applications to have issues like unreliability, hallucination, inaccuracies, and even unsafe outputs, which are really bad for when you're trying to put something into production. So we want to safeguard against that. And the way we measure these degradations and these inaccuracies is by setting up an evaluation pipeline. So I want to get into some kind of notes here on, again, motivating why do we need evaluation, talking about how to put together your data sets, how do you think about the metrics that you need to evaluate your application, and hopefully towards the end, including the demo as well, you'll have a good picture of that and you can go and start to apply some of these ideas. Now, a lot of people might be very intimidated about evaluation because it was a bit of like an academic topic, but I think now it's more accessible, especially because it has been now introduced and it's easier to use in tools like N10. So evaluation, what it allows you to do is systematically measure the reliability and performance of your AI application. So you're systematically doing this. Many of you probably have this experience where you are just eyeballing the results. That's a form of evaluation, but there is better things, better setups that you can have in place, and N10 will help you a lot with that. So what are the benefits of evaluation? Why do we want to do this? Again, as I mentioned, we want to confidently and efficiently build production grade AI application. That's what we want to aim to do. It's great when you have a personal project and you're using some kind of workflow, and the results, you're happy with them. But when you're scaling this to millions of users and you're thinking about putting something into a production setting, you have to start to measure things in a different way, right? So this is what evaluation introduces, a systematic way to measure how your application is doing. So it also helps with reliably tracking any degradations of major changes in your LLM applications. So if you do a model change or you change the prompt design or the structure of it, that should be captured, right? That degradation should be captured. You should have a pipeline to measure that. So the good news is that with N10, you can do this. You will see in our demo how we go about doing this very confidently and how to measure the performance of your application. One interesting aspect as well of evaluation is that when you have it set up, when you've invested a lot of time into it, it also allows continuous monitoring of your system health, right? So you have a way now to measure things over time, which is really important when you put something into production, because if you're not measuring it, something breaks, how do you know that it's offering the value that it needs to offer to your users? So it's really good to have something like this in place because of that. All right, so I want to start off with some best practices first. We're going to get into like how do you create data sets, how do you create the metrics, how you select them, and then we're going to jump into the demo. So let me go through a few notes here, just sharing some thoughts about what this process. I've been doing evaluation for lots of different kinds of applications, and typically, like I said, most of you probably are already doing evaluation, you just don't know it. Most of us are like eyeballing the results, right? You have an N10 workflow, you have an output from the agent, you look at the results, and sometimes you're happy with it, sometimes you're like, okay, you're frustrated. And when you're frustrated, when those cases happen, when it fails, I know a lot of developers, they just quit like building AI applications and they blame the AI, but it is because you don't have a system in place to actually measure things and to tell you if you're going in the right direction or you're going in the wrong direction. So evaluation does help with that. So as a best practice, you want to start off light, right? What's called the light evaluation. Handful of examples, you're just eyeballing them and see if the application is actually working. And everyone can do this very easily. You execute your workflow on some data set that you have created, small data set, and then you just look at the results. That's basically it. You can annotate it, you can tell it, okay, this is good, this is bad, good, bad, and so on. You can label it. That's really just light evaluation. Again, this is typically done pre-deployment. Now, the outputs of that you're getting from your workflow, right? You have to also have something to compare it with. So let's say we have like a Q&A system, right? Question answering system. And you have a bunch of questions that you want to evaluate your workflow on. You may have already, again, the outputs of the system, but then you also need something to compare it, right? Some ground truth. And typically what you do is you collect this ground truth, either doing synthetically or you can manually annotate it, right? You can put together what are the expected outputs of the system. So you will see visually how this looks. I know I'm just explaining this and probably is confusing for some of you, especially that are beginning, but we have examples of this and it will become more clear how this actually works. So we also have the opportunity now, once we are starting to get ready to go into deployment, to think about metric-based evaluation. Here, it's where it gets really tricky, right? And this could be super frustrating for a lot of teams. What metrics to use, right? How to set up my data set so that know that I'm measuring the right thing, right? How do I select the actual, the proper metric for my use case? So this is really metric-based evaluation is needed for deployment applications. Why? Because at this point, it's not sustainable to just be eyeballing the results, because you may have a ton of data already. Like if you're in production, you have a lot of edge cases that you want to measure or you want to run through your workflow. If you're just eyeballing that, I think that doesn't scale really well. You need a metric-based system to capture the overall performance of the system. So you need what's called a metric-based evaluation. And you also need to think here how to choose the appropriate metrics for your specific task. Again, the idea is to capture data that covers those edge cases, and once you have that in place, then you have basically built a system to measure degradation. So let's get into like the actual task of building this evaluation data set. How do you think about it? So the first thing is really important when you're building a system. It's no different from building a data set. You want to have a good scope, right? You need to determine what exactly it is that you're measuring. This is a mistake I see from a lot of developers that I work with. They jump into creating a data set, but they don't know exactly what they want to measure, right? Only after they have collected the data set do they think about this. And this is wrong because, again, you're spending a lot of effort and time collecting that data set. So you need to make sure you have a good scope of what exactly it is that you're measuring. As an example that you see here in my figure, I have a bunch of questions that I'm passing through an agentic workflow, and I want to measure specifically, this is one aspect of this system, how the agent is calling the different tools. You may have already built n8n workflows that have a bunch of tools, and we know that it can get tricky for the agent. Sometimes it doesn't call the right tool, and we get frustrated about it, right? And that's something that we need to measure, and it really matters for our use case. As you will see in the demo, I'll get into more details about this. How do you actually set up something like this, and how do you evaluate for something like this? But this is my scope, and this is my example. And then you collect the data, right? So you collect, in this case, I collected this data by basically going through n8n workflows, executing, taking that data, and putting it back to my data set. In this case, my data set is just a Google Sheet. And so tools to call is basically, me annotating manually all of these different tools that I expect the system to call once it sees this query. This is what I'm doing here. And again, this is one aspect of the evaluation that I'm interested in. You can do this, again, human labeled. You can grab edge cases from your production data if you already have that, your application running in production. And this is where it gets interesting, because you see a lot of different kinds of failures once it's in production. So that's a little bit about collecting data. And then, once that happens, then you're ready to like format your data set. And typically with evaluation, how it looks is like you have your input, which in this case is a question, and then you have the expected output, which in this case is just the tools to call. But you can imagine that this also has like a final output as well, because this is an entire agentic workflow. That would be another aspect that I'm measuring. But here I'm just focused on the tools to call. And so that's basically what your data set is, right? It's just an input and the expected output. And again, it would sometimes include executing the workflows manually, grabbing that data, putting it in your data set, or synthetically doing it, or manually doing it yourself, right? What you think is the right set of tools to call.
Not to interrupt, Elvis, but one of the things that you can also do now with the n8n node is you have the ability to pull executions using the n8n node. So you can actually automate this as well. So creating your data set is as simple as creating a workflow that takes that n8n node and outputs it to a Google Sheet, right?
And this is super, super convenient. When I found out that you can actually do this within n8n, it got me really excited, because one of the frustrations about building your evaluation data set is, gathering that data in an efficient way, because it's very time consuming, right? Like imagine if I had to like go into each execution and then pull this information. If I can like automate that process, it's going to really help me a lot. So that's an exciting feature. I didn't know about it, but I just found out, and it's really, really cool to see that we have that already in n8n.
For sure. One other thing I want to highlight now, one of the decisions we've taken at n8n is right now you do need to use Google Sheets in terms of storing these evaluation data sets. Now, this is something that our teams are aware of as far as working on, and our hope one day is to make it more internal to n8n. So stay tuned. Eventually, we hope to have this as part of our internal process. So excellent.
Yeah, that's very exciting news. I'm very excited about that. And once that comes out, I'm going to be experimenting with that, because that's going to be a cool feature to have access to.
for sure.
All right, so let's talk. So that was data set, right? How do you put together a data set? That process, it takes a little bit of practice to get used to how to develop that data set, and features within N10 are going to allow you to do that very easily now. And it's going to get easier, right? As Angels was saying, with the new features that are coming, it's going to be much easier to do this. But I think one of the hardest aspects of evaluation is selecting your metric, right? How do you know what metric to actually use? And what exactly are you measuring? This is why that scope was super important, because once you have that scope, then you know exactly what aspect of that system you're measuring. In my example, I am measuring the tool calling, because I've noticed my agentic systems, they usually don't call the tools in the right order, or missed an important tool, and that's really bad because that will affect the overall performance of the system. So there's something that I need to be measuring, and I need to know what is the exact metric that I'm going to use. So metrics, what they do is, again, measure some aspect of the AI system, and metric quantifies how the output of the AI system compares with a reference output. Again, the reference output is the ground truth, is something that you would put together manually, and that's typically how it's done. The metric you use, again, depends on the application and what you're measuring. Again, in my example, I am measuring the different tool calls. So for that example, what I want to actually check the tools that I expect the system to call, and match it with the tools that the system called. So when it went through the workflow. So basically, it's a matching that I'm doing. It's a very simple match, right? I don't need to really care too much about the order right now in this first situation. All I care is that it actually calls the tools that I said it should call when I'm doing this data set. And so for my example, just to keep on that little example here with the tool calling, what is the metric that I should use? So we have different ways on how we do evaluation, and depending on that, type of evaluation that you're doing, you're going to use different metrics. So the metric that I'm interested in for my example, as I mentioned, it's something that's like, it's basically a matching. So I can say something like is equal. So is equal is just it's an operator, it's a function, right? Where you're just comparing two sets. So two sets of tools, one that is expected and the other one that the actual set of tools that were called. So I will go with is equal, and you will see it in the demo how that looks. Put together the templates, and you have access to that. And you'll see how that actually looks in the scripts. But you have other ways on how you can measure, depending on the data that you have. So for instance, if you have like a summarizer, right? A lot of you are building agentic systems that summarizes, a piece of text, or summarizes a blog or something like that. If you have like a marketing use case, how do you select a good metric for that? It could be using some similarity metric. Basically, you have, let's say, some examples of ideal outputs that you want from your marketing agent, and then you compare that, how similar it is to the output from the agentic system. So you would select something like Levenstein distance or Rouge, something like that. And you can get pretty creative and clever here. You're not bounded by these options here. The good thing about N10 is that it's customizable. You can go into the node and you can change the formula that you're using, right? So anything that you want to use as metric, you can use that. I want to talk a little bit about LLM as a judge, because it's a very new concept, and where you use an LLM basically to judge how good that output is. And this is, I think, a very interesting approach, because this one scales really well, because you're not dependent on some metric that might have some kind of bias, or metric that's not really suitable for your application. Usually these metrics, by the way, is like they're just like little math functions, and they're not really easily customizable. But this one is super customizable, right? You can basically use an LLM to ask it whether there's some hallucination in the output, or if it's a safe output, or if it's a factual output, or if the output is relevant, or it's using the right context. There's many different ways you can get super, super creative about this. There are some really cool examples in the docs in N10 that you can go and try already with this LLM as a judge concept. In fact, there are a couple of examples that you can use. So that's a little bit about the metric stuff.
Excellent. And I believe that metrics is something that we're working on internally as well, something that we're working on pulling out and making more easily accessible within our platform. So hopefully soon we'll have a little bit more information on that. But just know, if you do struggle on the metric side, that is something where we're actively working on to make easier within the platform.
Yeah, that's and actually very exciting news, because the thing about metrics is that if you go into the docs, what I like about the docs right now, you go into the evaluation docs, there's a bunch of examples. That's where I got started, by the way. I went there, I looked at, the team has done an excellent job to put together like different examples for like RAG systems, right? If you have like, if you want to use LLM as a judge, if you want to use one of these metrics as well, there's also a tool calling one, which is like a basic tool calling agent. And I actually adopted that for my use case. Having those examples are great. And I just want to highlight that because the resources are just amazing. You can go and get started, with very little knowledge about it. And that's what is exciting for me, because I think after today, most of you will be able to go and start to apply these things.
Perfect. So with that, I had the opportunity and the privilege of actually sitting down with Elvis earlier this week, and we recorded this demo to kind of get an idea of how we can actually run these evaluations in production. So we're going to go ahead and play that session here now. I'm going to encourage you, myself and Elvis are going to be in the chat answering questions as we go, along with Julio and JP from our product team. So as we're going along, we want to be able to focus on your questions. We've already done kind of this demo together, but at the end, we'll have some time to answer some additional questions live. But until then, please feel free to submit these questions live on our chat. And with that, let's dive right in. Let's see exactly how to do evaluations in N8N.
Okay, so what we have here is a demo on how to use AI evaluation within N8N. So we've prepared 2 different workflows. And the first workflow, we're going to show you the actual use case that we want to run evaluations on. So let's just open what that workflow looks like and just go through it very quickly. So here's what the actual application looks like. So this is a very simple application. It's using multiple agents to accept user inputs, and it's going to respond to this user inputs. It's going to use different tools such as the web for collecting data based on that user input. It can also search for search results that have also been indexed in this quadrant database. So that's the other option that this agent has. It also has another tool, which is an agent. So this is an agent as a tool, which allows this agent here, this parent agent, to summarize the outputs once it is ready to output its final response to the user. And it also has this calculator tool that I've added here, just in case it needs to do some math operations. And then the model that it has connected is the OpenRouter chat model. Specifically, the model that we are using here is Gemini 2.5 Pro. In case you're using many tools, it's really good to use one of the more powerful models, and this is exactly what we're doing here. And what I've done here within N8N is I've actually created some mock data, which allows me to just quickly test this workflow. And this is a really neat feature in case you're experimenting and testing your actual workflow. So in this case, the chat input here is what's the most recent funding round for Anthropic. And that's the mock data right there. And now what I can do, I can just run this. And I want to show you again the workflow, an example of this workflow and how it accepts this user query and the different processes, the different tools that would be called. So here we go. We have the search agent, and the search agent is using this LLM, and it searches the database just in case there are some web results there. And the point of this is that if it does find web results, something that has been cached in that database, it doesn't need to do the web search. So basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to optimize the system to be able to use data that has been cached. And this is really the powerful use of the agent and connecting it to different tools like this. If it doesn't find anything in that search database, it will search the web for that information, because the thing with LLMs and agents is that if you don't give it the right context, it might hallucinate or might make a lot of mistakes. So the idea is that it can use both these tools to collect the context that it needs to answer that user question. So here in this example, we can go here in the search agent and we can see what the final output is. Now, it's not structured really well because we haven't done any structuring on the actual results, but we should have a final response, which is right here, right? This is just answering what the user has asked, which is something about Anthropic. So that's a quick overview of the agentic system that we have built. Now, what we want to do is we want to run evaluation on this. And just imagine that this is a very simple workflow that we need to assess and inspect how it's calling the tools. the tool calling is really important here. Notice that it has many different tools that it's calling, and the order it is calling those tools, how it's calling those tools is really important in this agentic workflow. That's the thing that we want to optimize. Now, just imagine a scenario where a user asks a question and it's trying to search the database for that information, or it skips the database for that information. Then it's just basically what it's doing, it's just going to call the web search, and that's not really optimal. So what we need to do is we need to think about a way to assess the system on how it's calling those tools, and we want to optimize that. And the only way to systematically do that is to create an evaluation pipeline. And the good news is that we can do that within N10 now. We don't really need to go out of the N10 environment. There is an evaluation tool and evaluation nodes that we could connect to this workflow, and that's very easy to do within N10. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our second workflow here, which is basically the same workflow, but it has the additional eval nodes that we need to set up our evaluation pipeline. Now let's click on this one. And you can see it's a little bit more extensive, yes, but the core agentic workflow is the same. We have the chat message that's coming in, and then we have the different tools that we're using, and we also have the quadrant vector store as well. And we have added a couple of nodes here. You can see that the new nodes that we have added are what are referred to as evaluation nodes, and those evaluation nodes are doing different things. And so in this workflow, what we want to do is, first, we want to be able to select a database, right? That we want to be able to select a data set to run through this workflow to perform some evaluation. What we want to do here is we need to tell the system when to do the evaluation and when to just behave like a normal workflow. So in order for us to do that, then we add this node here, which is basically asking and checking if it's in evaluation mode. So before we go into the different nodes that we need to run this evaluation, the first thing I want to show you is the actual data set that was created to run this evaluation. And I want to share a bit on the process and what exactly it is that I'm evaluating. Okay, so this is a data set that we're using for measuring how good our system is doing at the tool calling part. So here we have a couple of examples of user queries. So for instance, this query here, what is 5 times 5? For this one, the agent only needs to call the calculator tool. It doesn't need to call the other tools. So this is the expected tools that the model or the agent needs to call. And we have manually annotated this part. So we're doing some manual annotation with all the different queries that we're interested in this agentic system to answer correctly. So we have other examples here. For instance, this one here. So how much did OpenAI pay to acquire Windsurf? Take the results and multiply it by 1,000. So this one is doing a bit more. So it needs to search for information. For this example, I've actually stored the results or web results for the web results pertaining to this news. So in this case, what I expect the agent to do is to call the vector database or search the database, pull that information, ignore the web search. It doesn't need to call web search, so we don't need to pay for calling an API, calling a web API, and then it needs to call the calculator, and then it needs to call the summarizer, and then finally give us an output. So you can see that this one is a little bit different from this one, and they're roughly the same type of questions and queries, and it's because this one doesn't have anything cached. So it still needs to go and search the vector database. It will see that it didn't find anything, and then it will do the web search because it needs to pull that relevant context from the web. Then it goes through that same process, calculator, summarizer, and so forth. So those are all the examples that we have here. And so when we run this evaluation run, what we want to do is we want to run it through all the queries, and we have manually annotated the tools that it needs to call. And then later on, we have this field, additional field here, where we're going to write back from N10 the actual tools that were called from the agentic system. So now we'll have a view and be able to compare what is going on in the system. So this will be super convenient to have here, but you can also do it within N10 if you want to go deeper into the debugging the system and understanding what the system actually did when it was doing the tool calling.
That is so cool, Elvis. I think this highlights one other thing that our users might need to be aware of. You may need to run your existing AI workflow a few dozen, 100 times to generate this data set. You then clean it up. Once you've cleaned up the data set, you set the expected outputs. then you can start doing the testing. So you have to have an internal mental flow of what the evaluation flow is to be able to do it, because you have to first get sample outputs. You could create your own outputs, but what better way to create your output than with real world outputs first and then outputs? That makes so much sense. I'm with you.
So this is why it's very convenient, as I was saying, within N10, because you can switch off between evaluation and doing the test with the mock data, because now you actually have data that you can use to create your data set as well. So it helps you with creating your data set. I think that's really powerful, because that is really necessary when you're creating evaluation pipelines, like collecting that data, testing the system that you have in place, and documenting all of that to potentially create bigger data sets. So let's go back to the N10 workflow here. So we showed you just now the Google Sheet where the data set was. And so now what I want to show you is how do you connect your workflow to that data sheet. So let's go here. And this is very simple to do. So in here, you just need to set up your credentials. I already had done that before. And you need to set up the data set, which is the Google Sheet. So just once you have the right credentials here, you'll be able to select that Google Sheet. And then you select the actual sheet. So there might be many sheets in this data set, so you can select the right one. So if I click on this, you will see that in my one, I have 2 examples. So I'll just select this one. This is the right one that I'm doing the evaluation on. So that corresponds to my data set that I'm using for evaluating. I can also choose to filter the data set as well. So imagine in a scenario where we have like thousands of queries here, it might be convenient to actually just filter by some of these rows. And this is really important, because when you're doing evaluation, when you're doing your first test and you're iterating on your workflow and you're doing those first evaluation runs, it is very convenient to actually just test on a couple of queries instead of just running it through the entire data set. So that's a very useful feature that's within this node. This is about selecting the data set and the different rows that you want. And the next thing that we need to do is we actually need to format this data set, because this data set, notice that it has question, it has tools to call, and actual tools call, and we actually need to tell the agent what is the thing that we're passing to it. So we need to define that. So the way we would define that is we just set it. So this node right here is a very common node within N10, and basically what it's doing is just doing a mapping. So it's just saying the chat input with which the agent expects as the input, and we're just going to assign it to question, which is corresponding to the field name within our data set. So that's what we have done here. So now both this and this are inputting the same type of content and the same field. So now the search agent we can switch to evaluation mode, and we can switch to the chat mode whenever we want. And this is, again, very convenient to do this. All right, so I explained already what the search agent does. And I'm not actually going to go through all the details of the prompt, but you will get access to this template, and you'll be able to explore the initial prompt that I've created here to tell the model of the tools it has access to. Basically, I'm telling it, this is how you should use the tools. These are the tools that you have available. And again, you can assume that I'll be iterating on this many times. So this is just the first ROM. Let's assume that we just want a very quick baseline on this, and that's why it's not important that we get this perfect the first time. Now, the most important part of this and why we're doing evaluation is because we know that this system will not be perfect. We know that this system will have a lot of mistakes. So having an evaluation pipeline will allow us to assess where the system is actually making errors and what we actually need to improve. So that output that we're getting from the evaluation run will help us to decide and to make good decisions to improve this prompt. It's all going to be about improving the prompt and making sure that the system knows how to use those tools for different scenarios. So once we have that set up, now let's talk a little bit about the actual evaluation that's going to happen here. So this node, as I was explaining, basically is just checking whether we are doing an evaluation run or this is just the workflow running in normal mode, right? That's just executing queries. So that's what it's doing. Very simple check if evaluating. Now, if it's in evaluation mode, then it's going to go through this route here. If it's not, then it's just going to return the chat response that the model outputted. That's basically what it's going to do. What we want to do here is we want to actually focus on those last 3 nodes. And then I'm going to show you how to run the evaluation end to end. So what we want to do is we want to check what tools were called. And this is where I was pretty mind blown about this evaluation functionality, because this is one of the hardest parts of when trying to do evaluation. The fact that we can use expressions, the fact that we can use some script to check whether to check what tools were called, this is really powerful. So
That
this
is
is
really
what we
cool.
have done. So here within the script, I'm basically trying to take the tools that were called and compare them with the tools that the model used during that process. So the expected tools and the actual tools that were called from the model. And all we're doing is just a comparison here. If they match, basically what we're doing is we're telling it that's a true, that's a pass, or if it doesn't match, it's going to be a fail. So that's what we're measuring here. And you can get very creative here. The reason why I say this is really powerful, that we're using some scripting here, is because you can get pretty creative about how you want to do this matching. In this case, it's quite simple. It's just basically going to look at the set of tools that we expect, and it's just going to take the actual tools that were called and just do a comparison. This is just matching. But you can get less strict with this. You can tell it doesn't need to match everything for as long as it matches one, or if the first tool matches, that's okay. You can get pretty creative here. And I think this is a really powerful way of assessing whether your system is actually doing what you want it to do. From my experience, I have used a lot of evaluation tools, and this is the part that we struggle with. What we have done here, and you can see it's quite simple because we actually just introduced one of the common nodes, which is a set, and we're just manually mapping. But you can use code, you can use anything here. You can use a model if you want as well. You can use LLM as a judge if you want. You can literally connect a model. You can get super creative and very complex here. How you want to do evaluation is in your control. All right, so once we have the results of that, and one thing I want to clarify here before I move on to the other two nodes in this workflow is that the actual tool calls is just coming from the data sheet. You can see it right there, but the intermediate steps are pulled from what the agent is outputting. So in order for you to get that information, those intermediate steps, you have to do a very simple step here. So in this search agent node, we have the choices to specify how we want to output what the model is responding. So the model will have, for instance, the normal output, or we can also enable to output all the intermediate steps. So all the logs of all the steps, all the tool calling, the actions the model is taking, the responses that those tools are responding with, and so forth. So we just need to enable this here, and we'll have all that information. That information is really important because we're using that within the node right here. So that's how we enable the search agent to output all of that information that we're using here.
Perfect. Elvis, could we see that in the UI actually? Because I believe we can see that in the logs. If you run it in the search agent, is it possible to take a look at the logs and see what is being passed out in a more human readable format there?
Okay, so what we can do is we can easily go here and just use the mock data. So we can just hit here and just run this instance. It's just going to use the example here that we have as the query. You can see here that the input is the same input that I've configured before. And now it's just calling the different tools. So from here, I will show you the different views that you can use to inspect how the model is using those tools. And you have different views. You have the JSON view, you have the normal views, but you also have another view that's more friendly. So we'll look at that in just a second.
Excellent.
So here is calling the summarizer is just another agent. All right, so this is finished. We can go into the search agent now.
Lovely. And I see there on the right, we have the output, the intermediate steps. Normally that JSON would not be included if you hadn't flipped that toggle, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And you can see all the information is it's raw information that you're getting from the LLM provider APIs. So you're getting the tool that was used, you're getting all the parameters and so forth that would use for the function calling, and all the different intermediate actions that were taken. And then obviously the information that the tool is sending back, which is the observation in this case. So it's action observation.
I love it.
So
It's almost like you're storing its chain of thought in a way.
Basically.
And I think if you click on the logs at the top, we can actually see that in a more human-friendly output. So this view is available all the time. We're able to use this whenever we run it manually, but we typically don't have access to this unless we flip that toggle on the bottom left where it says return intermediate steps. Then that gets returned as JSON as well for us to then pass it into the evaluator then.
Yes, especially for something like this that's very detailed. You can see
Mhm.
the nesting of it. It's very hard to actually read. And sometimes all you need to do is just get a high-level view of this. And so this is a very useful view. So you just click on the logs there, and you will see exactly, okay, it called the web search, it called the summarizer, and then in between those, it actually had to use the model, right, to do the tool calling. And so you can inspect that right there as well. Awesome. So let's continue here. After we did that check right here, again, what we're getting from this mapping functionalities, we're getting either true or false, right? True means it passed, it called the right tools, and false means that it failed, meaning something went wrong in how it called the tools. Maybe it did not call one of the tools that it needed to call. So that's what we're actually outputting here from this mapping node. So now what we need to do is we go and we write back this information. So for our case, what we want, and let's go back to the data set, what we need for our scenario is we need to see what were the tools that were called. So you get the visual view of the tools that were called. This is, again, very similar to that logs view, but because you may want to write actual more information into the data set, you can also do that here, right? So you only have basically the tools call and the actual tools call. You can compare that manually. Now, you don't need to actually do this step, but it's useful to have some data written back into your data set. This is what this node is actually doing. So it's called set outputs. So what is this node and how do you get it? Let's look at it. And you can see here that there are different modes for evaluation nodes. So we have used so far check if evaluating, right? This is just to check whether you are in evaluation mode. And then it has a set metrics. You're going to get into this one. And you also have the ability to call an API as well. But we're not going to use this here. We're only going to use these three. So set outputs, that's what it does. So let's look a little bit more in detail what it actually did. So basically, you connect your credentials again. You connect your data set, which is the Google Sheet, and you set your sheet as well, which is tool calling in this case. And then you have a field, a column called actual tools called, and then you just write back that information. See, again, we're using the intermediate steps. That's a very useful piece of information for us. One thing I want to highlight here, this is quite powerful because in this case, it's just tools called. But in some cases, you may want to actually write back all the reasoning that the model went through to make that decision of the tools that were called. In addition, you may also want to inspect the actual parameters that were part of that function calling when the LLM was used, and also what was returned from the tools as well. So you can get pretty detailed about what exactly you want to record. This is why that set output function is quite powerful, because you get to customize it. You get to customize the outputs that you want to see from the evaluation run. And this is great for inspection. It's great for debugging. In my example here, I just want to see the actual tools because I'm in the first iteration. In second and third iterations of this, I may actually need to go and drill down into the actual observations and the actual tools that were called, the parameters and all that stuff. Again, because agents, when agents are connected to many tools, they usually struggle to call the right tools. So this is why it's really important to inspect and be storing that information somewhere for you to be able to debug the system properly.
I love it. I think an analogy that I've heard used a lot with AI agents is it's a black box. You can't really look inside of it. This allows you to extract what's happening inside that black box and put it someplace useful.
So now the last step here, which is set metrics, this is the last step in the evaluation workflow here. It's basically just going to take whatever information we want, which in this case is the tools called, and it's just going to convert that into whatever score, right? So set metrics actually expects that you pass it some type of like value. It expects an actual metric. And in this case, the metric is basically either 1 or 0, meaning 1 will be whether it actually passed or called the right tools, and 0 being that it didn't pass, it actually failed. So that's what we're doing here. Again, you can get creative about how you want to store and set this metric. And the good thing is with this one, I don't need to write that back to my data sheet. I could write it if I want. I could literally create another node here or do it right within this node as well. I can just add that information, but I don't need to do that here because N10 already has its own evaluation dashboard where I can actually conveniently see all of this information summarized. So that's what I want to show now. Those are the different steps, and everything looks to be set correctly here. And what I want to do now is run the evaluation pipeline through all the data set, all the examples. So what I need to do for that is, if you notice here, we have the editor, which we are in that mode right now. We have the executions, if you want to go in details on what the workflow is executing. And then we have this new evaluations view where you get to see all of the information compiled, and you can now take a high-level view of how the system is performing. So we'll show that in action now and run the evaluation. So let's click on evaluation here. And then you can see that there are a couple of requirements for this. So we needed to wire up a test data set. We did that already. We need to write workflow outputs back to the data set. We did that part already. We wrote back the tools that work out from the system. And then we need to set up a quality score. Okay, so this one is set as optional here. And this is exactly what we did, right? They showed you how to write back the metric, and then we're ready to run evaluation here. So I'm gonna hit run evaluation and wait for this process to go through all the data, through all the examples in the evaluation data set. So here we get a neat dashboard. Now we know it's running. And here you can see that it ran at this time. So you can pretty much get a good view of how long this evaluation run, how long your evaluation runs are taking. So this is good information that you're getting here. And then you have this little dashboard up here that shows you pretty much the score. So what we're going to get and what we expect is basically like an average, right? We expect a score of how the system is performing on the tool calling aspect of it. This is just about tool calling. We're not assessing any other things, but we can add more things to it if we need it.
What are some examples of other, besides tool calling, metrics that we might want to set? Like, it makes sense, like for certain things, if you have an internal agent that is always supposed to check, for example, an internal knowledge base to see if it's getting the data from knowledge base, this is awesome. But what are some other examples of tool evaluation metrics that we might want to set up outside of tool calling for AI? Like,
right.
If we have a generic prompt, I guess maybe structured outputs.
Yes. So one very popular example that you can implement very easily here within N10 is this idea of LLM as a judge, right? So you're essentially using an LLM to score the quality of your outputs. So you basically define a rubric on what is great. So let's say you have a scale of 1 to 5 and you are rating the quality of an output or the safety of an output. That's another common example as well. And you give it a score. So you don't give it a score, but the actual model that you set there is giving it that score. So basically you take that score and then it's going to show up here. So it's an actual metric that it's an actual metric that you can set and you can see within the dashboard. Here, the metric here is just 1 or 0 because it's just pass or fail, right? It's just a binary metric. But in that case, it's like more granular, right? Because you get an actual score of it. And by the way, we can also do that here in this example. So here we chose to do it in this pass or fail mode, right? Either pass or fail, but we can actually tell it, hey, give us a score, use an LLM to judge the actual tools that were called, make that comparison using the LLM. You can pass the intermediate steps, you can pass the actual tools that are expected, and we can use an LLM to compare both of those outputs and produce a score of 1 out of 5 or something like that. We can also do that.
Gotcha. So we're picking 0 and 1 because the metrics output is numerically based, but we're not limited to 1 as the final output. We can create different outputs based on different numerical values and use those to evaluate the outputs in a more visual way.
That's correct.
Makes total sense. Okay, I'm with you. That makes a lot of sense. Because what I'm imagining is like, I have a lot of AI agents that currently will output structured outputs. And so I could map different values from those structured outputs to different numerical outputs and get an idea of how often I'm getting certain outputs on a given evaluation run. So in my mind, that might tell me like, I'm getting more of one output than another, or in some cases, it's failing to output that value completely and might be arrowing out. That's something that I could then see.
Right. And you will have that here recorded, and you can look at the different parts that failed. So we're going to take a look at that in a minute. It's still running. You can see that the status is running here. This will take a couple of minutes, by the way. This
Yeah,
is actually going to spend some time doing it because the data set has a couple of examples. And if you saw in the example that I ran, this one example, that it actually took a minute to run. So you can imagine 1 minute per each row.
makes total sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
very
this is the reason why it's for every evaluation run that you do, you also get that metric. You also get that metric on how long it's taking as well, because you can get some optimizations from that. So that information is really important to record, and we have it here available in the dashboard.
I love it. I love it. I know that in the executions, we can see when it started, but it's hard to tell how long it took to run. So this is a very cool way to see that.
Okay, so we have the results of this evaluation run. You can see that we only did this once so far. So this is the first evaluation run, and the status was completed. If for some reason something went wrong with your evaluation run, it will tell you that it failed, and it will tell you specifically where it failed. And you also have the average result, right? So this is just an average of how good the system is performing on that data set. So it's roughly like 30%, which is not that great. But as I said initially, this is just the first iteration of this workflow. Our job now is to take that number and increase that number, how good the model is calling the tools. And this tool will allow us to run as many iterations as we want. And the idea is that we are increasing that number. But now we have a systematic way of checking whether the agent is calling the right tools that we expect it to call. So we can actually drill down on this. We can go and click on it, and we get a nice little dashboard here. We get the numbers, right? We did the score here, but you can see that the metric that was recorded is either 1, right, for pass, and 0 for fail. That's what we recorded in this case.
Makes
So we
sense.
have all the successes here. Everything succeeded. Every row in that data set succeeded. And that's really good to see because we know our evaluation pipeline is working as we wanted it to work. And we have
Very
14 cases
cool.
corresponding to all the records in our data set.
I'm
So
understanding this a lot better now, Elvis, because now, like in the past, I would have no way of knowing. So I know we're running Gemini right now, right?
yes,
It would be very difficult for me to then, I'd have to copy this workflow, create like a new spreadsheet, set up the
yeah,
outputs, and I'd have to do all this work just to see if I wanted to compare this to OpenAI. But
exactly.
now all I have to do is go into the editor, swap out the model or
Yes,
change the model from the dropdown, depending on which model you're using. And then from there, save it and rerun the test. And now you can do a side-by-side comparison with what, 4 clicks maybe to be able
yes,
to see that. That is
yes,
very cool. I'm excited.
yes,
Now I'm excited to try this out. This is cool.
yes. Yeah, so that's a great point, right? Because like we can run as many evaluations as possible. We can change the model, and now we know we have concrete data and concrete evidence about how the system is performing. And that's a combination of things, right? That's the power of being able to pull all that raw data from the LLM calls, the also the data set as well, right? It's really important to make sure that your data set is of high quality. And if you have a human annotating that data set, obviously there will be a few mistakes here and there, but this process will give you a very good representation of how your system is actually performing rather than just eyeballing it, right? Because this is how a lot of people are doing it today. They're just eyeballing in the nodes themselves what the model is outputting and so on. And that's just not sustainable to be building a system and continuously improve the system over time, right? So as you put something into production now, you're able to expand your data set because now you have actual data coming from your users using your products, and you can collect edge cases, bring those edge cases back to your Google Sheet, and then just run this again. You can do that very easily now because you have everything within the N10, right? You don't need to go to another tool or an external tool to actually run the evaluation. And you can keep switching the model, you can refine the prompt as well, and so forth. All right, so the next thing you can do here, once you're in this view, this drill down view, you can actually check, for instance, what happened with this run, why it failed. So this is connected to basically executions. So you can check the execution itself. All right, so what we have here is the execution itself. And basically what we can do is we can look at it manually, what happened with this particular run. And we can check, for instance, the actual run here. And this was a question about Windsurf, the acquisition with Windsurf. This is the rumor, OpenAI acquiring Windsurf. And we also see the intermediate steps and so on. But for some reason, this query for this query, the agent did not call the database. whether something was cached for this query. And in fact, there is something that was cached for this query. So this is failing. And this is an important failure that the dashboard highlighted. This is something that we can drill down, and we can potentially will need to go and improve the system message, the system prompt, to be able to call that tool or force it to call that tool every time queries like this.
Yes.
So this is going to be like the next step. And in addition to that, because we recorded that data as well back to our data set, we can actually go into the data set and look at what it looks like.
Wonderful. That makes total sense. I can't tell you how many times that's happened. And because I can't drill down like we're doing here, it makes it very difficult for me to know how to adjust my prompt. So I really like this ability to be able to drill deeper into the execution, get an idea of exactly what's happening in that step, and then be able to adjust my prompt. Like, it would make sense. Yeah, like it's probably just using its training in order to give this answer, or even the vector store.
Something is influencing the system to avoid using vector search. These are problems that are very hard to spot with agentic systems, right? They're very hard.
Oh, yeah.
And here we get all that complete view, and we can drill down and we can actually see what the issue is. So now we have a proper next step that we can take, right? Something based on evidence, as opposed to like us imagining what the model, or making assumptions about what the model is actually deciding, right, for us. So we can take a look at the datasheet view here. So if we go back to our data set, so this is the data set that I was introducing earlier. And in this data set, we wrote back the actual tools that were called. So let's look at that third example, the example with the windsurf acquisition. So we can see here that the tools that the model needed, the agent needed to call, were the search database, and that's the one that it skipped, right? So it calls the calculator as well. It needs to call the summarizer. It did all that really well. Like you can see here, it did that well. But the first one is not the proper tool that it should have called. It should have called the search database. And there is something indexed in our database about this particular query. And so this is very inefficient. The system is not that efficient at this point. And we have many examples like that. If you look at all the other results, this is why it's really great to have the ability to write information to our data set, because it's easier to compare. It's easy to compare, and we can look at the execution. So having those both views is really powerful, because you can actually see what the issue is. Now, I can quickly see, based on this data set, that it's completely ignoring the search database call. Look at it. Like, it's not calling that search database. It's not calling that vector database. So something is wrong with the way how we have prompted the system. And now I have an actual next step that I can go and iterate and improve the system.
All right, excellent. So, Elvis, from looking at the comments, I think everyone was really interested in this demo. So, what I want to do now is we got a chance to kind of see this in action. My hope is that now we can actually show your improvements, because you've had a chance to run this on the back end, essentially run this, I think one more time with some changes. And I'd love to see what changes you've made, as well as a look into the prompt to see like how we can improve this as well.
Yes. So great questions overall. I was answering some of the questions. One of the main questions here was the importance of tool calling, right? How you can get it really wrong if the agent is not calling those tools properly. There were two suggestions in the chat that I want to highlight. The first one is instruct the model better how to use those tools, and another direction would be to separate these into its dedicated agents that call those tools separately, right? So that's another way you can sort of approach this. Now, I've actually done some iteration on this agent and sort of improved it. I know that 30% accuracy is not really compelling, not so exciting, but the question was, can we actually improve this? So what I did was, to me, very surprising. I work with these tools a lot. I work with agents a lot, and I cannot tell you how impressed I was by trying to add some modifications in the system prompt and running this workflow again and looking at the result and how significantly the performance improved on the agent tool calling part. So what I did was I actually had this really simple query. I didn't modify it too much. What I did was I was telling it I am providing some instructions below on how to use the tools. Please follow the instructions carefully. And then I spent some time detailing out how to actually call those tools. So this is the first approach that I was talking about, where you detail out to the agent how to use those tools, right? How do you expect it to use those tools? That's actually very important and helpful context for the system. That way the system doesn't make assumptions about what tools it needs to call. It will call the tools that you tell it to call and in the way that you wanted it to call. So that's a very important part, very important context to give the model. So once I changed that, that's basically the little changes that I did here. And I also added, like, the tool expects a query string. If you use this tool and find relevant information, don't use the web search tool. So there's some logic that it actually needs to follow. But basically, I forced it to call the search DB tool because that's an important optimization in our workflow. So once I changed it and I made that very explicit to the system, I run the evaluations again, and now I have a second evaluation that I did on this system. And just look at this performance. Like, we went from 30% to 80%. This, like, I would have expected to be spending many hours on this, and I literally just changed the instructions. And the reason I was able to capture that is, if you notice the evaluation data set that we were showing, that it completely missed the search DB tool calling, right? So we just explicitly told it in the instructions. We have that evidence, and we were able to improve the system very easily. And I'm happy with 80%, but I'm sure I can take it even further with some iteration. I can probably improve the prompt. I could probably use some of the suggestions to separate the agents into sub workflows and maybe sub agents that call their dedicated tools. If I have many tools there, I can also experiment with different models, and I can have a comparison of how the system is performing. You can see that this is an improvement, but at some point the system will probably degrade, and having this dashboard will tell us whether we need to actually keep improving the system, right? If we do some model change or prompt change or something change in our workflow. So this, I was super excited to show this, and this shows the power of having these evaluation tools readily available in systems like N10. So they're very excited about that result.
I love it, Elvis. This is great. Let me ask you this. I know that this was from last week, so I'm not sure if your workflow executions still have the old prompt. Could we quickly take a look at the original prompt that we had in the for the demo, and then the improved prompt, but almost side by side, if you not side by side, but one right after the other, so we can kind of get an idea of what's changed.
Yeah, well, I showed the optimized version of it, which is the 80%. But I want to show you how it looked previously, right? It like I said, it didn't really change that much. I mean, I actually want to show you one of the executions. I can open this execution. I'll need to share this tab because I'm sharing the other one, I think. Just let me know if I'm actually sharing the right tab here. I want to show you the prompt, because that's all I changed. I didn't do anything too special, but this is what I'm saying, right? We're leaving so much on the table because we don't have.
Currently showing a gray screen. Do you mind unsharing and then resharing once more? I'm not seeing it currently.
Let me see. I'll just refresh it.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see if it shows. I see your mouse, so I think it's trying to share, but I think it might be sharing the wrong thing or a background or something. Okay. If you want to completely stop sharing and then reshare.
Okay. Should stop sharing. Stop sharing.
All right, excellent. Let me know once you've got that shared again.
Yeah, just trying to open it here. Yeah, okay, I got it. Let me show you now.
Perfect. All right, let me add that. Okay, I think there we go. Perfect. Yeah, now we can see it. Excellent.
Okay, so now I need to share the other tab. Okay, so sharing this tab instead. Can you see the new tab now?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay. We can see it.
This is the execution mode. And by the way, nothing changed in the execution mode, with the introduction evaluation, but this is the process I think people need to get familiar with. And that's a great question, Angel. This is how we use this actual, the data to keep improving the system. But I'm going to look at actually the system instruction. This is what you ask, and you will see the difference here. Now, let me see if I can, because I know.
Real quick, Elvis, I know we're over time. We're going to extend a little bit more. We're getting so much interest here. I want to make sure that we definitely cover this and people can kind of see these improvements. And I want to cover a few of the questions that were asked as well. So sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
Yes, I'm going to do this quickly. So this is basically the query, right? So I added some instruction, and pay very close attention. This is not here. Pay careful attention to my descriptions and the flow and the logic that I want you to call those tools with, right? There is a logic that I want you to follow. It wasn't here in this first iteration. And normally this is how we work with agents, right? We just quickly prompt them and we just, the model is going to make a lot of assumptions. But what we're doing with the second iteration of that system prompt is we eliminated all of those assumptions. And now the system can perform a lot better. And we have a systematic way to do that, right? It's not like we're just eyeballing. We now have like a metric to measure that. And imagine if we had like thousands of cases, right? Because maybe this is something that's in production. This will be able to capture those, those mistakes. And some of those mistakes are like very, very hard to spot. But that's basically I just kind of improved the instructions of the tools and how the system should call those tools. Everyone is working with agents today, right? Within N10. This is basically something you should be doing, right? This is not an optional thing. Like if you want your system to actually be accurate, regardless of the use case. Yeah.
Okay, so perfect. So this is the first prompt. Can we now move into the other evaluation execution? Let's take a look at that one and compare it.
So, okay, so this is the first prompt. Let me open up that's this one. Okay. So this is I need to go into the second run. Oh, so you can access right now, right? I think.
Let's see here. It's not showing quite
yet. Showing? Hold on.
I think you stopped sharing a moment ago, so you might have to head back.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Here we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I'm just going to quickly show you here. This is the one with the 80%. See if I can open. In fact, I think I should be able. Oh, yeah. Executions. I might just go to executions and just open it from there. Yeah, this is much easier. I don't need to open a new tab. Yeah, so this is the one that just ran, right? This is the latest one.
Yeah. And just I know that this is all running kind of on the browser as well as our streaming app and all of these things all at once. So I know that it's probably affecting the performance on your end a little bit. Like even I can hear on the microphone as well. So
yeah, apologies for that. Yeah.
No worries at all. Just want to call it out.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the improved one, right? So this is the one that we just did. Let me just I can zoom into this one. Here we go. Perfect. So this is the one that we just did, right? So you see, it's more detailed. It's actually putting in some of the logic that we wanted to follow. We eliminated a lot of assumptions, and basically what this did was it always calls a search database tool because that's an important tool call that the system needs to perform. In the previous iteration, it wasn't doing that. So that's the improvement, right? Because it's not. So I was able to catch that because of all the debugging that I did, the executions. I was writing the data back with the N10 node, eval node, right back to my data set, and that's where I saw the mistake, right? And it was easy to capture using that data.
Perfect. Now I know we're past time already. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending so far. I wanted to still cover a few of the questions that we got in the chat because I thought some of them were really well phrased. And I just kind of want to highlight some of the answers we have here. So I'm going to start here with a question from Aimel Sayer. How to detach evaluations from the workflow. I want my evaluations to run only in a separate pipeline and not as part of my workflow. This isn't something that we demoed in today's demo, but essentially something that I hope that N8N users will start to adopt. And it's one of the most powerful features, I think, in N8N. And that is the ability to create sub workflows. Now, sub workflows may not seem like that big of a deal, but what this allows you to do in code, you have a very similar analog in terms of functions. So what you're doing is create reusable pieces that you can use in different environments. So for example, this AI portion, what you could do is embed the AI portion only inside of a sub workflow. And then that AI portion essentially embed in two different workflows. One that is your production pipeline, handles all of the actual inputs and outputs, and then also embedded in your evaluation pipeline. So essentially you can run both separately, but both of them are using the same AI to essentially run the evaluations or do the production. This also gives you the ability to on the fly switch, between different models. So if you're using OpenAI and you want to switch to Gemini, you can very quickly just within one workflow that affects multiple. Elvis, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the sub workflow is something. I didn't even use sub workflow. Well, I have a sub workflow. I'll be lying if I say that because there is a summarizer component of this. But like this is the first iteration, right? If I were to do like more iterations on top of this, which is very common with agentic systems that are very complex, I'll be thinking about those ideas, right? How to use sub workflows and different tools, right? Different category of tools. I'll put them in, together with those specific sub workflows. So that's something that's right there on the table just to kind of experiment with, right? I think those could also help with the design of the system. It's easier to debug as well. So it's a powerful feature for many different reasons. And I think as a researcher and as AI developer, those are things that I want to like think about, right? How do I modularize better my application? So it's there to use. So that's just a few comments on that.
Love it. The next question I wanted to hit, is this available for self-hosted? Now, I think a big part of what gets everyone excited about N8N is the community edition. I know that's how I got into N8N, was essentially learning, on my own on the community edition, kind of getting started. And then from there, as I worked in other organizations that needed automation, having them utilize the enterprise or pro versions. So I just wanted to highlight that, yes, this is available on the self-hosted edition. So there are differences between the two. The self-hosted community edition supports a single evaluation. So again, if you're running this for yourself, it gives you the ability to still run these evaluations, but you only get one within the evaluations tab. If you're on the Pro or Enterprise, you have an unlimited number of evaluations. So you can essentially create as many as you want, run different tests on them, and you're good to go. Anything to add to that, Elvis?
No, I think that was I think enough information from that question.
Perfect. We also got a question from Madan. I think this is something that we kind of actually showed in yours, is when I have many tools used in N8N, sometimes the agent cannot decide to run the right tool. Why is this? Yeah. So, and I think that your example, Elvis, highlights this perfectly, because essentially what we're doing here is a big part of AI is your prompt. It's your context. It's what you're giving it. You can tell it in the prompt, hey, first check the vector store, then check the web, and then check this. But unless you have actual metrics, which is what this evaluation tool does, you kind of are shooting in the dark. You're not sure, if these changes are really making a difference or not. Right. So to that end, that is essentially the point of today's demo. So great question, Madan. Let me see here. So I'm going to see if I can find another one.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring awareness to this, right? I wanted to bring awareness because I could have chosen any type of evaluation, but I know that a lot of N8N users, I looked at the templates, everyone is using tools, right? And we just take for granted that the agent will be calling those tools. But the thing is, a lot of the times these agents don't have good knowledge on some of those new tools that are being added. N8N is great, so much support, so much capabilities, so much nodes that you can use. But at the end of the day, that agent, that language model, if it doesn't have knowledge of that tool, that system will fail a lot of the times. So that's what I wanted to show, right? And I think that's the reason why I wanted to show the multi-tool calling part.
Love it. The next one I wanted to highlight is using evaluations might be able to fine-tune token cost. This is also, I believe, something that should be doable, correct? If I'm not mistaken, you can output the token number as part of your AI flow. So that is a metric that you can then pass into evaluations as well. And the goal here is to decrease the number, not increase it, right? Any thoughts on that, Elvis, as far as how to reduce token costs across using evaluations?
Yeah, I love this question because everything that we're doing here, right? We're just focusing. We're focusing on one aspect of it, but then another aspect of this, because we're using so many tools, we are calling the web search API, we're calling a search. Those things are costly, right? And so if we can, along this process, measure that as well, which we can, it would allow us to optimize that part of the system too. And we can also think about latency as well, because when you're calling tools, there's a latency component, right? So all of that should be measured, and this is what evaluation does. It basically forces you to think about all the optimizations that you'll be able to get from that system as you think about like production grade, systems that you're building, right? If you're just doing this for personal use, you probably don't care too much. But as you want to put something in the real world, latency, minutes, like cost, that all of the stuff matters. And so that's a consequence of going through this process, and you get that as well.
Love it. Love it. All right. Well, I think we're way past time. Elvis, I just wanted to take a moment. Thank you again for showing up today for this amazing demo. I know that before the session we had, I was a little intimidated by the evaluation of a new feature. And I was like, how am I going to integrate? I have a lot of AI workflows, and sitting down with you and running through this demo has really helped show me the power of this and allowing me to improve my own AI performance, as well as get a deeper understanding of the power of N8N. So I wanted to thank you again for that time. That basically brings us to the end. So I just wanted to give you a moment as well. Do you have anything you'd like to kind of promote? So I think you have DAIR.AI, is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Angel, again for the invitation and the team. I saw the chat. Julio, thank you so much, everyone in the background there, for all the questions as well. Desiree, great job as well organizing all the stuff. Really, really appreciate the opportunity. I'll be, submitting. I'll be trying to put more effort into the community forum as well, answering questions there. If anyone needs to debug anything, just reach out to me. LinkedIn, Elvis Saravia on YouTube. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Twitter as well. Just reach out. I love having these discussions. So thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. Well, then that brings us to the end of today's session. We've covered a lot, from building evaluation data sets and designing meaningful metrics to actually running evaluations in N8N and making smarter decisions about your prompts and models. If you take away one thing from today, let it be this: evaluations aren't just for research papers or giant AI labs. They're practicable, they're accessible, and they're one of the best ways to bring stability and confidence into your AI workflows, especially as you scale. Since our first iteration of this workflow, we've learned a lot about what works, what doesn't, how to evolve that, and we're continuing to improve. If you want to dive deeper, we've linked a few times, and I'll go ahead and pin that once more. The data set and flow that Elvis used today is available at the link below. There we go. So feel free to visit the bit.ly links to download this template that he utilized, as well as the Google Sheet. And use that as your starting point to essentially start working on this. And this video will be on YouTube as well. So feel free, after the stream, you should be able to access it on YouTube to kind of get a better idea, if you need to rewatch it, of how to kind of dive deeper into those templates. Again, big thanks to Elvis for joining us, sharing your expertise. Everyone in the chat, including our product team, JP, Julio, thank you again for being there, for answering these questions, for your insights. And if you like this format, you want more content like this, stay connected with us. We run these N8N at scale sessions regularly. We'd love to see you at the next one. Until then, keep building, keep experimenting, and as always, stay curious. Have a great day and take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.